Joining us on Air Sports News, Janet Patton. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Janet, captain with, is it American Airlines?
American Airlines, yes.
You've just come back over the Atlantic, have you?
I did. Yeah, just got in yesterday from London.
So I appreciate your time. Probably the last thing you want to be doing right now is speaking to me, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
How long have you been flying with American?
23 years.
Wow. So you've seen a lot of changes, eh?
Yes.
Over that amount of time. You know, just thinking back over previous interviews I've done with commercial airline captains, and I think all of them have been with women pilots, but the actual percentage of captains is quite small on the whole, isn't it?
It is. It is. And actually, right now, I'm a first officer. I'm not a captain. I was a previous captain last year.
Yeah.
I actually did a down bid on the 777 to first officer position.
So tell me how let's go back to the beginning. Tell me how it all started for you flying, Janet. Are you from a flying family or what?
Okay, so nobody in my family started flying or knew anything about flying, actually. I was 11 years old when I decided to be an airline pilot. And there were several forces in play that caused me to have that decision made at such a young age of 11. As I said, nobody in my family flew, but I did have an uncle in the Air Force who had passed away in Vietnam during a mission. I knew that he was a pilot, but he was deceased before I was born.
Right.
But they still talked about him and honored his legacy and his service to our country. And I knew about airplanes because I lived near a Air National Guard base that had some planes there. And then in January of 1982, Air Florida crashed in the Potomac River. I was in elementary school at the time. I turned on the TV, saw the images from that accident, and put pilots and airplanes together in an airline career. And it was that day I decided I was going to be an airline pilot.
That's incredible. So you'd actually made the decision you were going to be an airline pilot, not just a pilot. Your first idea wasn't just to learn to fly. You actually wanted to be an airline pilot.
That's correct.
Interesting. So what was your route? How did you go about achieving that?
So I had never been in an airplane before until I was 14 years old. And when I was 14, a few things significant happened in my life. I went to a career center and found out that I could not be a military pilot. I was out on 2 counts. I was out due to height requirement, and also I was out because I wore glasses. I also joined Civil Air Patrol when I was 14 years old. So that was pretty significant for me in my career. And I also convinced my mom to give me an air ride in a small plane when I was 14. And I kind of tricked her into that. My parents really didn't like traveling and didn't really want me to be a pilot because they were probably mostly fearful and didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And I was able to, since I'd been talking about it for 3 years already, nothing but airplanes, similar to now. I don't think I've grown out of that. Anyway, I was able to convince her to give me a ride by basically saying, you know, Mom, if I don't like flying, I won't talk to you about it anymore. And she was certain that I would not like flying. So she said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I went flying in a small plane, a Cessna 172, and I definitely loved it. I couldn't get the airplane to do what I wanted it to do, and I was frustrated. And my only thought was, I need to learn how to control it and get it to do what I want it to do. So that's what I did.
I've not heard that before. What were you thinking? Did you want it to do? What were you trying to?
Well, it kept turning, and it's opposite for you, but for me, the plane was turning left, and I'm like, how do I get it going straight? I want it to go straight. Seemed like it kept wanting to turn to the left, and so that was frustrating to me. And I was definitely more convinced after that flight that I was going to learn how to fly because I wanted the plane to do what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't enjoy the fact that it seemed to be flying me around the sky instead of me flying it.
Fantastic. I love that.
So yeah, so in Civil Air Patrol, it was actually the Civil Air Patrol in the 99s that actually gave me my start at a very young age. The Michigan Chapter 99s. I had joined Civil Air Patrol when I was 14.
Yeah.
And when I was 16, the Michigan Chapter 99s gave out a scholarship to a female cadet for an attendance at a week-long flight encampment. And I won the scholarship in 1986, and I attended a week-long flight encampment in Saginaw, Michigan. And every day I had ground school and flying, and I was in heaven. I absolutely loved it. At the end of that week, I was able to have my first solo. And after that, it really opened my eyes to the fact that I could take flying lessons at a local airport at the age of 16.
Right.
So I soloed at 16, and I continued on with flying lessons, and I got my private pilot certificate when I was 17.
Oh, wow, that is something quite amazing. That's so young as well. And how did you get then the connection with the airlines? Were you sponsored by an airline at the time, or did you work?
No, we don't have anything like sponsorships. And in fact, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the industry was actually pretty bleak.
Yeah.
So what happened for me was my career path to get to the airlines was I got my private, and then my instrument rating. And then I got my commercial pilot certificate and my flight instructor certificate. And then I became a flight instructor. So I started building my hours as a flight instructor, which is a very common path for civilian pilots. And I did that for a while. And while I was doing that, I got my multi-engine rating. And then, of course, that's a big one. Having 2 engines to use was a big goal and a necessary goal to be an airline pilot. And then I kept building hours. I did have some small jobs of corporate flying for a brief time, flying Lear, Citation, Westwind.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do that for very long because corporate just wasn't my kind of flying. And my first real delve into air transport, I call it. I really enjoy, I don't use the term very often, but it's air transport, aircraft that I really enjoy. So in my case, I knew that one of my weaknesses I felt was knowing aircraft systems well. So I just put myself into a local ground school. An FAR Part 135 company was doing a ground school for DC-3.
Yes.
And DC-3s are old air transport.
Yeah, yes.
Really the first one in pretty much. And so I had no intention, it was a cargo company. I actually had no intention of wanting to fly cargo. I'm a people person. I didn't think about cargo at all. And I thought, well, I'll be headed to a passenger airline because I'm people friendly. And so I just did the ground school on the DC-3 to learn the systems well. Well, a girlfriend of mine and was a co-pilot at the time at that company. And the company allowed us to all go take a jump seat if we wanted to, but I really had no desire. I was silly and naive and only 20 years old and didn't know very much. Like a DC-3 jump seat was probably a great opportunity, but I was not thinking that.
Right.
And the only reason I went on the DC-3 jump seat was because she called me and said, hey, Jeff is my captain. And I happen to know her captain. I went to school with him. She said, Jeff's my captain. We're going on this trip. Why don't you come along? And I said, okay, I'll come along. So the only reason I went on that DC-3 jump seat was to be with my friends. That was it. And then I fell in love with cargo flying and that was the start really of my career. So all of a sudden I went, oh, this cargo flying is not so bad. This is, really neat. And so I had an opportunity to jump seat for quite a while until they finally said, well, you're not really an employee or anything like that. So we really can't justify having you up here anymore.
Ah.
So I got quite a few flights out of it until they told me no. And then what I did is that same friend was actually starting to learn systems on a DC-4. And again, I did the same thing. I was just learning systems to improve my knowledge base on air transport category airplanes. Because I knew it's a necessity for pilots to know systems fairly well. And so taking a weakness and turning it into a strength, that's what my goal was. And so I sat through a DC-4 systems class with her, and we didn't have a DC-4 at the time. The company was going to get one. And so I had nothing really to look at. and systems don't really come natural to me. I'm not mechanically inclined. So when they would talk about like a brake lockout cylinder, it was hard for me to understand what that was. But there was a DC6 company nearby. And when we were talking about the DC4, they would say it's similar to the DC6. And so I just went to one of the local companies. At the time, this was Willow Run Airport in Detroit, Michigan, or near Detroit. It's actually Ypsilanti, Michigan, but it's close to Detroit. So people kind of lump it all together. But Willow Run Airport, significant airport for cargo flying, had a couple of DC6 operators at the time. And I went to the director of maintenance. Now at the time, this time I was 21 years old.
Wow.
And I went to the director of maintenance and I explained to him I was learning systems on the airplane, but I wasn't understanding what those systems were. And he got a mechanic to come over, and he told the mechanic anytime I showed up, I had a list of questions. He could stop doing his job and answer my questions. So I did this a lot, actually. I would come by, and the mechanic ended up starting to be kind of happy. He'd see me and get to stop whatever he was doing and come over and, show me things like the brake lockout cylinder. So I did that for quite a while until I decided to go to the director of operations and see if I could if I could get permission to jump seat on the DC6. So I walk into the director of operations office, and I started telling him my name. I said, I'm Janet. And he goes, I know who you are. And I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. I have this complex sometimes that I think I'm in trouble when I'm really not. But so I thought, oh no, this is not good. He knows my name. So I just said, well, I've been learning systems on the DC6. And he goes, I know what you've been doing. And I said, I would like to see if I could jump seat sometime in the DC6. And he walked me down the hallway to what was called a flight following, similar to a dispatcher office, and said to the flight follower there, this is Janet. He said, give her, at the time it was pagers. We didn't have cell phones. We had beepers, pagers. So he said, give them your pager number and they'll call you for a trip. So I got called several times to go out, and when I could fit it into my schedule, it was always at night flying, and I was going to college locally during the day, but I would go as much as I could. Sometimes the crews would let me fly the airplane. They would hop out, the co-pilot would hop out of the right seat. It had a flight engineer in the DC6. Co-pilot would sometimes give up their seats, let me fly if it was legal. I have to clarify on some of it, non-revenue flights, some of it legal to do because I had the qualification of multi-engine and stuff like that. But anyway, I was able to fly a little bit. Of course, none of that was logged time, but I was able to get the experience. Well, to make basically what happened after that was one of the co-pilots who would give up his seat sometimes to let me fly became the chief flight engineer at the company across the field. And what happened, this was in 1991, he went over to the other airport, other side of the field. And the director of operations over there just had a kind of offhanded remark that they were looking for another co-pilot. And he mentioned me to the director of operations. I didn't even have a resume in with him at all or anything like that. And he just mentioned me and said, there is a pilot across the field that will come out. I know she knows how to fly. I watched her fly the airplane. And I got called by the director of operations for an interview, and they hired me.
Wow.
So I got to get, and that was my first Part 121 flying job. And that was flying co-pilot in a DC6. All the training is in the real plane because there are no simulators for those.
Yeah.
And so they put me through ground school. I had ground school course with 2 professional flight engineers. So a lot of it was over my head on some of it. But ironically, every time the ground instructor asked me a question, I knew the answer because I had been doing that studying of the systems.
Yeah.
And so I got the reputation for knowing what I was doing because I got all his questions right. And he was quite surprised because some of them were pretty technical. So I was very happy about that. I ended up flying that airplane for 6 months, 220 hours of flying before the company went out of business and I got furloughed. From there, I went back to flight instructing because aviation was looking pretty bleak, hard to find a flying job.
Really? It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, 1991. Yeah, the economy was not great.
Right.
And so I ended up just flight instructing to keep building time and stay flying. But I was out of, other than that, I was out of a job for a while. But I kept putting in resumes after that. And a company called Zantop International Airlines picked me up, and they were actually located right next door to where I was flying the DC-6. That was a great job. I got hired to fly as a flight engineer on the Lockheed Electra L-188, the 4-engine, or for military guys, the P-3 for the Navy. And I did a short time, 6 months, I think, as flight engineer on that plane. And then I upgraded to co-pilot on that plane and stayed there until I got my next job. And so I had a cargo background there, Part 121. That was my second Part 121 airline. After that, I kept building hours and putting out my resumes. And in those days, they were paper resumes and you had to walk them around. There was no technology, no emailing people. And so I just went around and either mailed them out or hand walked my resume into what I thought would be the next company to go for. And for me, one of those companies was Spirit Airlines. Mm-hmm. And I kept every month, I would be changing my resume and adding my hours to it. And I would walk my resume in and they would put it on the stack and I'd get to know the people that were there because every month I would do this.
Wow.
And I was very fortunate because I had a mentor, friend of mine who I had met through the 99s. And her name was Valerie, and she was an FAA inspector and the POI for Spirit Airlines at the time. Right. So this is now 1996, and Spirit Airlines had been flying for quite a while. They had her as a woman POI, that's Principal Operations Inspector, for those who don't know. Basically means she's the FAA inspector in charge of that airline. And she would, when they had a revision to do in the manual that she had to approve, she would say, you need to start changing the wording, the pilot he to the pilot he, she. Right. And they would be like, well, why are we doing that? And she said, to welcome your woman pilot when you hire her, so that the manual is written for her as well. So she basically, she gave them a good word. She told them that she knew somebody who was qualified to fly their airplanes and they should consider bringing me in for an interview, and they did that, and they ended up hiring me. So for Spirit Airlines, I became their first woman pilot in April of 1996, flying
737s, was it?
DC-9.
DC-9.
Yep, DC-9s. Yep. At the time I got hired, they had one DC-9-20, and they had DC-9-30 models and DC-9-40 models when I got hired. So I flew with them. It was great experience there also. And then in March of 98, I flew my first trip as their first woman captain.
I remember as a youth plane spotter, sometimes getting a little bit confused between DC-9s and 111s, but you gotta figure it out.
Yes, there's a few things that you can look at to tell the difference between them.
The angle of the engine was a little bit different, wasn't it?
I think so, yes. Yeah. And the engine, I think the engines might be different as well.
Yes. And what happens next then? You're with Spirit now, DC-9's going on. What happens next?
So I flew for almost a year, not quite a year, as captain for Spirit on the DC-9, and then American Airlines. I interviewed with them in the fall, late fall of 1998, and got hired with them in December of 1998. So, and I've been with American ever since.
Wow, what a story! What a story! But you've, as well as that, and how busy that can be, you've still found time to take up hot air ballooning.
Yes. Yeah, so the hot air balloon kind of factored into the picture so before I met my husband, who's now my ex-husband, and that kind of goes back to that I met him through being a flight instructor when I was still part-time flight instructing. I met him and taught him how to fly, and we ended up getting married. Before I met him, I was able to go on a hot air balloon ride because I had a flight instructor while I was working on my ATP with him, which is airline transport pilot certificate.
Yeah.
When I was working with an instructor, he was also rated to fly hot air balloons. And one day he said, hey, if you're around and you want to come out, we're planning on flying a hot air balloon. He said, I can't guarantee you can go for a ride, but you can come out and see what it's like. So I said, okay, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So I did that. My impression definitely was it's a lot of work. I was in the chase vehicle. I don't remember much about it, but I did not go for a ride initially. We set up the balloon, people got in, they took off. I got in the chase vehicle. The most I remember then next about this memory, and this happened, I think in 1990 or 91, right around the same time that I was flying that DC-6.
Yeah.
Anyway, I remember somebody saying, Janet, get out, hurry, go to the balloon, go run to the balloon. So I run out to the balloon and I hopped in and I got to go for a ride. And that was pretty neat. But my opinion overall was this is a really neat once in a lifetime experience, but I would never want to do it. It's just so much work involved. And I was like, yeah, great experience. I highly recommend people to go try it and do it. But as a pilot, I'm like, no, not for me. Flash forward to, I'm married now to that man who was my student at one point, and he's also an airline pilot. And we moved to an air park in Georgia. And as a welcome to the neighborhood gift, we were given a hot air balloon ride.
Wow.
And we didn't take our ride together. We took it separate. The man who owned the balloon did my ride first.
Yeah.
And we launched from his backyard, which was only about 3 miles from my house. And I had the recollection. I was like, oh yeah, this is what I remember. You know, it's nice, you know, and enjoyable and stuff like that. Well, nothing spectacular for me, was certainly not something I wanted to pursue. However, my husband, we launched his balloon flight was out of our backyard. And I thought that's pretty cool. I mean, I have a picture standing in the balloon and I'm behind our house. And I was like, this is pretty cool. So he took off from the back of our house. And then I chased, of course, with the people who were chasing. And when he got out of the balloon, he was like, this is awesome. I want to do this. This is great. And I was like, oh, here we go. I'm like, oh, supportive wife. I think we're headed this direction, right? So we ended up buying that balloon. And we bought the balloon and he took commercial flying lessons in it. He skipped the private because you can do just a commercial add-on if you already have your commercial certificate. Yeah. It's just an add-on for him. So that's what he did. And we started an air ride business right away.
Really?
Yep. So I was his crew chief, one of his crew chiefs when I could. I was the scheduler, when the phone number on our van and on our trailer was my phone number, and on our website, people would call me and they would want to know about hot air balloon rides. And I would give him the information, then I would schedule his flights. He was senior enough at his airline. He could work, by then he was already a captain at his airline, and he could work Monday through Thursday and then leave Friday, Saturday, Sunday open for flights. So it worked out really well.
Right.
I was taking some lessons along the way, but I had young kids at the time. And like I said, it's a lot of work and I just did not really enjoy doing it while I had the young kids. Yeah. So I kind of put it on hold a long time, thinking, well, I'll have time in the future to get my certificate or add-on for it, for the balloon. And then we got divorced and we owned 2 balloons at the time. And when we were discussing, you can't fly two balloons at the same time. So, so I said, what are you going to do with the second balloon? And he was like, I don't know. Do you want it? And I'm like, sure, I'll take it. So I had the balloon and I kept it airworthy, and I made changes and modifications that were legal. Well, not myself, but I asked my repairman to make, as we were keeping it in airworthy condition, to make changes and modifications that were approved at the time to make it a little easier to fly, because it's an older, what we call an older system on the balloon. So there are some improvements, especially safety improvements over the years. So I kept it airworthy. And then finally last year, I decided I was just going to get it done. I had already accrued 16 hours with different flight instructors flying in 3 different states, in Georgia, Denver, and Colorado and Texas. And last year I just decided I may as well just do it. So I went out to St. George, Utah, and got my commercial add-on for the balloon. And then last April came back to Texas here and started flying the balloon and learning the area and training my crew. I started the balloon ride business last year, and I at the same time decided to go ahead and start a flight school, because the days, because because I own a Piper Cherokee 180. And so, do you know anything? Have you been in a hot air balloon before?
Yes. Yeah, I've had a 10 or 12 rides, maybe.
Okay.
I've helped with the rigging. I've helped to set them up and drop them down again. And I'm a skydiver by trade, so I know it's very similar to a very, very big parachute, putting them all together.
A big parachute.
Yeah.
So did you have any kind of celebration at the end of those flights?
No, well, the only celebration was get out and grab hold of the apex line and hold it tight while we try and drop it down. But I went to a balloon festival in Qatar at the end of last year. I was doing some work there for that, and I saw a whole different side of ballooning. We didn't even touch it. They had a crew there who did everything. We just got out and they handed us a cup of tea and a sandwich, and I couldn't believe I didn't have to get hands on. And the pilot said, I've not touched a balloon for 5 years.
Yes. Well, one of those, besides tea, did they give you champagne at all?
Not there, they didn't. No, it was in Qatar, so it was tea, but normally it's champagne, right?
So, right. So with the champagne, a lot of times when we do flying, especially for first time people who have gone for a ride and stuff, there's a champagne celebration at the end of the flight.
Yeah.
After you pack up the balloon, we celebrate the flight, and that dates back to the history of ballooning since the 1700s. That has to do with the very first flight in hot air balloons. And so anytime, because the rule, the FAR that says I can't drink alcohol and go flying, anytime I fly my hot air balloon and have a champagne celebration after, I can't fly my airplane or anything else for 8 hours after that.
Right.
So I decided to start a flight school because I didn't want my plane just to become an expensive toy sitting in a hangar that is not exercised and can't be flown. So I decided to start the flight school at the same time I did my hot air balloon ride business, so that I can concentrate on flying the hot air balloon and doing air rides.
Yeah.
And I have flight instructors who can fly my airplane while I'm flying the hot air balloon. So that's where we are right now, is I have a hot air balloon ride company and a flight school. I have 2 airplanes right now for my flight school, and I'm in the process of getting a 3rd, possibly a 4th. And so we've been in business for about a year now, and things are going well. And that pretty much takes up a lot of my time right now.
Wow, I can't imagine how you would have any spare time at all available to you.
Right.
What an incredible life you're living at the moment.
Right.
Is it all your dreams come true? Is this where you wanted to be when you were that 11-year-old girl, do you think?
Well, I never anticipated owning a flight school, so I just fell into it. I certainly did not want anything to do with hot air balloons, and now I own 2 of them.
Yeah.
So, so a lot of aspects of my life are not things I ever envisioned, but I love flying. I love flying for the airlines. I love air transport specifically. I enjoy the air transport planes is my passion. And then I just basically love flying. And so I end up flying whether it's flying the 777 or whether it's flying my Piper Cherokee or my Piper Arrow, or whether it's flying the hot air balloons. I enjoy that, but I enjoy mostly being able to first get people where they want to go, if that's the intention, such as our flights to London and back. That's always enjoyable, or just sharing flying. In the hot air balloon, we have no goal in mind. It's just an experience, and it's very social in nature, and it's just a different form of flying because you're going with the wind. So something I thought I would not necessarily be passionate about, there are definitely things about it that I am passionate about.
Brilliant. Well, Janet, you have been a perfect guest. What a great journey through air sports and flying that has been. Really, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed spending a few minutes and telling me about your life.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.